Hello and welcome to Fire in the Belly. Today we have myself, Mighty Pete, and we're joined by the Marsha Vanwynsberghe. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you. Thank you for having me.
Listen, thank you so much for coming on the show. So tell us, Marsha, who are you? What are you doing? Where are you from?
I am from Waterloo, Ontario, Canada,
Mhm.
and I am, wow, a whole bunch of things, but I am a speaker, coach, author, and just really am here to talk about stories and really help people to share their stories, and primarily the ones that are the difficult stories. That's really what it comes down to, is teaching women and men how to stand on their stories as opposed to in them. And yeah, it's just a different, I like to flip the words. I like to shift the thinking, because that's what I've had to do with myself. So that's how I share that.
We're going to get on like a house on fire. I'm looking forward to this. What's a difficult story then? Tell me.
A difficult story is any story that you would class as a shame story, and which is most stories. And shame is very much something that is, what's the word? We each just decide it individually, right? So what is shame to one person might not be to someone else, or vice versa. I have seen people come to me with incredible shame stories who they don't look at it that way at all, which I love. So, for example, we just published a co-authored book, and one of the stories in there is a girl who is a survivor of human trafficking. And she shares her story and what she is choosing to do with it. And she's like 25 years old. I wish I was that enlightened at 25. But what she's lived in 25, like what she's lived is a lifetime. And she makes it very clear. She's like, I'm not a victim. I don't want to be called a victim, because I'm going to do something with my story. So shame stories are really relative. I think that's the word I'm looking at, is that sometimes it depends on the person and what we hold on to, and it gets all wrapped up in our fear of judgment of others, and not looking perfect, and not being what we think, or we don't want other people to see that we're struggling, which, hello, everyone is in some way, shape, or form. So it's very, very relative. So I like to take a spotlight and put it onto shame stories, and help people to see that the story only has whatever meaning we give it.
I like that.
Mhm.
I'm going to go off the deep end here.
Go.
What's your
It's all good.
superpower? What's your superpower?
I think my superpower is really helping people to see their story differently, really helping them to see that, yes, this is what happened to you, but this is what you can take ownership for. And this is a bit of a trigger word for some people, because I didn't ask for something terrible to happen to me, but it's what do we choose to do with what happened that matters. So I help people to really separate themselves from the story, to then see that they do have some power, and that they actually can move forward. It doesn't have to define them. They just it when a client has that light bulb moment, to me, it's just like, there's like no going back. They can see that they actually do have a choice in what they do next, no matter what's happening.
That is a point of no return, right? It's just you can't
Mhm.
unknow what you know.
I love that. I was trying to come up with that in my brain. That is one of my favorite quotes. It's like, you can't, once you know it, you can't unknow it. And I see that in these women who come in very timid, shy, but wanting something different, like wanting to not live the story that they're living, but they have no idea how to get there. And I even take it a step further, that I really help them to build a platform so that they can not only overcome their story, they can learn how to teach, coach, speak, or write, and impact others with their story. Because the more we start talking about shame stories, the less shame has a hold on our lives. And it's really, once they have that moment, they all of a sudden they become the coach, mentor that they were looking for years before, and they can be that person.
It's kind of weird, isn't it? It's like an away from goal. It's like, I want to write this so that I'm no longer this. But the problem is, the further you get from it, the weaker the goal gets, or the weaker the incentive gets, right?
Yes. Yes. That's a great way to say it. That's a really great way to say it. It's a really interesting process watching them go through that. And a lot of them will say, I'm not going to build a business. I don't want to do that. I'm like, okay, we'll see. And almost all of them, in some way, shape, or form, they start, like, some are writing a book, some are blogging, some are doing a podcast. And it's so powerful to watch these women who came in so full of shame and timid and small and, carrying armor, preventing anyone from seeing them, to all of a sudden they're just flourishing. And there's so much support. Like they're so afraid to share, but then they be vulnerable and then they're like, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed, because there's all this support. Because I actually do think deep down, we're all struggling in different ways, shapes, or form. And the more we see how similar we are as opposed to different, the more we can connect with people.
What was your shame, if you don't mind me asking?
No, I don't mind you asking at all. Which one? I have a few. I have a few. I know, right? I'm
Get
gonna
the list
go.
out. Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
thank you for asking. I have a pre-prepared agenda. Yeah, so
I knew it was going to go there, which it should. So for me, I think if I go back a long ways, at 12, I was assaulted by a group of boys. And we lived in a very small area, actually really small village. I'm even going to say that. And it became a case of it was young kids and wanting whatever. And I knew that was not the path or pattern I wanted to repeat. So I went to my parents. I remember doing this at 12, waking them up in the middle of the night because I was so afraid to tell them. And we called the police and we reported it. And it was it was such a pivotal moment. And when I wrote my book, which I'll come back to the other shame story, when I wrote my book, I wasn't going to put that story in there. And because a lot of people didn't know it. And I had done a lot of work to move through that. And it was my sister who said to me, you have to put that story in there. And I'm like, there's no way. Like, why am I putting that story in there? She's like, because that was a pivotal moment. You became this advocate at a young age. And it's important. So that was something that I didn't share with a lot of people until my book published. And I had so many people going like, oh my God, you didn't even know about this. But it was important to share it because it was very formative for me as a young kid. And so then fast forward many years, there's lots of little stories in between. But as a parent, we were dealing with teen substance abuse at a level that I just wouldn't wish on anybody, and I wouldn't wish any of it on anybody. And we were dealing with it in a space that it just started and never stopped. It was a straight up hill roller coaster. And no matter what we did, and in the space that we were in, um, became a hider. I was definitely a hider. I was a hider from the world, but I was very much an advocate for them in the sense that I was trying to get help with whether it was support or counseling or whatever it was. I was very open. But as far as friends knew, I was like, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm all good. I'm fine. And that was when I started to really understand the meaning of carrying the armor, and the fact that we use it to protect ourselves. We think we are, but the world gets really, really small. Like it gets so small. And I have many light bulb moments, but for me was realizing that the armor was protecting me from pain, but my world was so small and my problem hadn't changed. And that was just a really pivotal moment for me. And I started to share my story. Um, just not even with any intention of a business or help. Like that wasn't even on the radar. And I started to, because I've been speaking so much with the schools and trying to get support, they had me and my husband coming in talking to other parents. They had us, because it was just all of a sudden this eye opener of, wait, you mean I'm not the only one who's struggling? Like, how is that possible? I thought for sure I did something wrong. Like I was convinced I did something wrong. And it was a whole series of things, but I found a Facebook group with moms who were looking for support. And I mean, this Facebook group was like 100,000 moms. I'm like, whoa, 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 what's going on here? Like, what is going on? This is like, you mean it's not only, is it not just me, but it's like a massive problem? Like, it was such a moment. And I just started to share bits of my story, not theirs, mine, and what that was like. And every time I did, I would have somebody come up to me and say, Oh, I've never told anybody. We lived through that. Like that was my story. It would never failed. Every single time I started to share it, it was just like, that's my story and that's my story. And it became this light that, wait, there's a whole bunch of us struggling with stories that nobody wants to talk about.
I love the way you were talking earlier on, and you talked about almost, using the same energy, but in a positive way,
Hmm.
and how I'm assuming then it takes a sort of an evolution of that process. So you take a traumatic or significant event, which has a massive negative energy draw, till eventually you can neutralize it to the point you can actually switch the charge and becomes your why, right? Does that make sense?
That's such a great analogy. No one's ever said that it to me that way before. It's such a really good analogy. I think that's it exactly. I remember sitting with a counselor, and as a what's the word? I'm not. It's not perfectionist. I'm a fighter. Like, in deep down, I'm a fighter. I like. It's like, okay, what do I have to do? I'm going to do it. Just keep going. I remember taking this checklist to the counselors, and they're like, okay, yeah, you did it all. I'm like, no, but you don't understand. I still have a problem. Like, what do you mean? Because I did what you said, and it's not gone yet. So I don't understand. And they would say, because it's not your problem to solve. And I'm like, but they're kids. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. And that took so much processing that I couldn't understand what to do with that. And I remember a counselor saying, she said, for the amount of times we are dealing with parents, you and your husband are literally the only parents that are still together, that are in this group, in this city, in this. It's so, she said, you're such an advocate. I remember saying the word, and such a fighter. What if you're supposed to do something with this? Like, what if this isn't by accident? What if this happened for a reason? And I'm sitting there going, all of a sudden, I was like, wait a minute, maybe there is something to this. Like, maybe I am supposed to do something. And once I gave it purpose, like literally a whole lot of things started to change in my brain. And it didn't change my relationship with my kids right away. It didn't change, like, I changed. That's what had to happen first. And when you're trying to save everyone around you, that's a really hard thing to do. It feels selfish at first. It feels very, very selfish. But I'm pretty sure if I didn't change, I'm not sure I'd be here. Like, that's how close I was to saying, I'm done. I don't want to watch this. I used to say to my husband, it was like being duct taped to a chair, watching the scariest movie ever, and you can't go anywhere. And it was like, I don't want to be part of this anymore. I don't want to watch this gong show. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see how it rolls out. And that was a turning point, is like, what if I'm here to do something with this? What if I am supposed to speak up? And I just started asking different questions.
When you talk about different questions, I mean, it's what's coming across there is almost like the scale of the whole thing is almost unfathomable, right? You just kind of going, how is this possible? And then it's almost, where do you start? I mean, how do you?
It was unfathomable. It was. Um, and I think the turning point, to be totally honest with you and your listeners, but the turning point for me was almost losing them both in a span of 4 days, and both things happening in our own house. And as a parent, you think you're keeping everyone safe. And that was my light bulb moment of like, this isn't this, I'm not doing anything. I'm not solving this. I'm not fixing it. I'm not saying what the right thing to do is, because people go, you're supposed to kick them out. You're supposed to. I'm like, nope, because we made lots of mistakes, lots of mistakes. But last time I checked, they don't come with manuals. And there was no manual for what we were living. That's just that's how my brain had to process. We did everything we could think at the time, but there was just nothing more that we could do. And so when it got to that space, that was such a light bulb moment of like, this is not my problem to fix anymore. Like, I am not the solution. This is their journey to figure out. And I will learn how to take care of myself so that I can love them. I still always love them, but it's not mine to fix. And it's interesting because this is when a lot of the dialogue I started to learn helped me, which helps my clients, is the fact that like two people can't own a problem at the same time. If you're both trying to own it, nobody owns it. And if nobody owns it, nothing changes. And that's when and not blame, I'm not talking blame. I became and created mantras in my head of, okay, that's not my choice. That's not my choice. That's not my choice. So what's my choice? This is my choice. This is my choice. Like, and that became such a thing that I had to mentally go through over and over. I'm not here to fix it. That's not my choice. This is my choice. And that means like really actually owning my own choices. Because for a long time, I blamed them for everything. I'm going to totally be honest. Blame them for literally everything that was going wrong because I felt like my life stopped in order to take care of everybody. But that was my choice to do that. So that's where ownership came from. That's where radical responsibility came from. Those are my words that I practice on a regular basis to anchor me. And when things aren't going the way I want, which again, is literally always like stuff happens all the time. It's like, what can I do? What is my choice? What do I have? What is my responsibility for myself? And that means not blaming others when things are not going the way that we want them to, because blame and ownership are total opposites. They can't, if you're going to blame people for where things are at, there is no ownership. So those are just, they really became language things that I had to cement in order to shift myself. So it certainly wasn't an overnight process. Many people will say, that looks easy. That's easy for you. I'm like, no, it wasn't easy. It was never easy. It was a choice. Every day was a choice in how I did it and how I respond and what I do with it. So it was definitely not easy.
I mean, what's coming through? It's almost like, the sort of the backpack or the sort of the knowledge or the expectations of a mother. It's kind of going, do you know what? This is a role. There's only one of you. You have a role to do, and you have to stand in that space.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really first off, you said backpack, which is so powerful because I use backpack all the time with myself and my clients. It's like, okay, but you're choosing to carry that. Like no one's making you give that guilt. You're doing that. Like that's your choice. So take a really good look at what's in your backpack, because we didn't sign a document as a parent that we take 100% responsibility for everything that they do, because that doesn't help them to be an adult. Like at the end of the day, we want to raise them to be functioning adults in society. And I don't know where the line crosses, but I said these things long before we ever had issues, is when kids are younger, and you see a kid in a store throwing a fit because they can't have a candy bar. And what do we do? Literally, let's be honest. What do we do? The first thing we do is we look at the parents. You're like, come on, like do something, like do something. And that is all unfair, but there comes a point in time when we don't share a brain. Like we don't share one. And I used to say that all the time when they were younger. They're like, well, Johnny did this. I'm like, good. Do you share a brain with Johnny? No, you don't share a brain with Johnny. You have your own brain to make a decision. So that applies to us as parents too. Like we don't share brains. And if we don't let them make mistakes at any age, then we're forever picking up for whatever you call a mistake. Because I think we can learn from everything. I don't think it's all wrong or bad. But if we don't let them make mistakes and land, they can't figure out, they don't know how to make decisions. And they're going to be forever looking back at you at 20 and 30 and 40 and saying, but mom, fix this. Like, what do I do? So I think it's really important that there comes a time that they have to own that choice. And those were the words I got to the point that sometimes they would be like, I know it was my choice. And I'm like, cool. So if you know it's your choice, I used to say that, and I'm swallowing this advice myself. Every decision you make brings you to where you are today. If you don't like where you are today, you just make a different decision. Don't blame yourself and beat yourself up. You just make a different decision. And eventually it's really interesting in a fast forward sense that changing me changed my relationship with my kids, with my spouse, with everything. And I didn't fix things because that was their decision to do something or not, but it certainly made all of our relationships much better.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And I mean that sort of child tantruming on the supermarket floor, and but we inherit the shame of people looking at you, judging you, and you kind of embarrassment. You go on the kid.
I did that. That's my fault then, right? Like we start from a young age. That's my fault. They're looking at me funny. That's my fault. I have to do something as a parent. Mm-hmm.
It's like, and probably there is a sort of a gap in values, because in some ways you're so pissed off with the kid. It's like
Oh,
kind of going,
Jesus.
I don't really care. Tantrum out on the floor, that's fine with me, except when someone across the way is looking at you, as you say, they're looking at you, not the kid. They're looking
Yeah.
at you.
Yeah. And we
And
take that on, right? We take it on. I remember once when my youngest was throwing a fit in the grocery store. And I remember this lady, I crossed aisles with her 3 or 4 times, and the looks were constant. And I finally, at one point, I remember saying to her, your kids did it too. Like they did it too. It's not like they all do it. They all act this way. They all have those moments. Nobody's kids are perfect. And I remember once leaving a full cart in a grocery store and walking out with my kid because I'm like, oh, okay, we're done. We're done. We're just done. So it's just interesting because we inherently take all that on. And when you think about baggage or backpack, take it like from strangers, from family, from like we're just constantly, we are putting on this shame blanket over and over that we're wrong, it's our mistake, it's what we're doing, it's our fault. And like just think of how suffocating that is.
makes sense. What do you desire?
What do I desire? I think I don't know why freedom was the first word that came to my mind. Um Freedom in just creating, the word life keeps coming up to me. Um the last decade has been a battle. It's been a challenge. And I feel like it's interesting. There are times I feel like we're crawling like out of a hole, just trying to move forward because this has been a really heavy, heavy decade of things to deal with. But then as a mentor said to me, she goes, no, you're already out of the hole. Like you're already out of the hole. You're not coming out of the hole. You're out of the hole. It's how you look at it. So I don't have a problem surrounding myself with people who call me on my own thinking and my own, because I need that support just as much as anyone.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think it's just, I think in allowing that message to spread, that so many people we don't have to feel the way that we think that we do. And it's heavy work. It's heavy work, but deep down, I really feel like that's what I'm supposed to be doing. So when some women reach out to me in their stories, there are moments where I'm like, holy cow, like I'm just, this is just, it's heavy, but I feel like I'm in the right spot. I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be.
Kind of almost as it's like a situational agoraphobia or something. It's just like all this stuff is just, as you say, weight that even as they talk
Mhm.
about it, I can feel the weight. Just
It's so heavy. I mean, a lot of the women who reach out to me that I end up working with, they're not victims anymore. So I really took my last like 4 years of working with clients one-on-one and really broke it down into like 4 categories of what blocks us from owning our story. And everyone I've ever worked with falls into one of those four. So victim is one, and that's like it's still in the blame space. People pleasing is just so huge. Hiding, a lot of hiders, and then fighters. So fighters. I was a bit of all of them. Okay, I'm going to be told I was a bit of all of them, but a lot of the women who come to me have moved past the victim stage, and they're like, I want to do something. I want to, actually, maybe that's why freedom came to me. I want to be free of my story like I see you doing. I want to know how to do that. So they don't have a clue what to do next, but they're not victims anymore. And they've just found their way to work with the others. And I think that that's where we carry all of the emotions and thoughts and opinions of others. And then we fall into people pleasing, we fall into hiding, or we fall into the fighter. And the fighter is the, like they said, that was me, and still can be me. It's a bit of a default. And that I'll just do it. Like, I'll just do it myself. I'll do it on my own. I keep going. I push. If you work harder, it will happen, which is not always true. And that's not always true. So I think those are the things that we tend to carry from. Here's the thing. Does anybody make us feel anything, or do we do that ourselves? So those are all of the things that we carry. But again, we have to realize we're still choosing to carry it. And the great thing is that means once we realize that, we can change that.
At a realization, and it's funny, not, I mean, it's something came to me recently, was that, it sounds obvious, but you cannot actually experience anything outside of yourself.
No, that's such a hard thing to take on. It's such a hard thing to accept sometimes, but no, you can't. You can't. Now, people will try, but you also have to learn the self-care, so like some people will have very difficult family members. They will have, opinions and strong-willed family members or friends. And you have to learn how to not take that on. I always use an example without a name. I had one person, and that was another turning point. And she came to the house, 2 different people. And she came to the house, and it was very much like, why are you not doing this? Why are you not doing this? Why are you not doing this? Very critical. And I'm like, you have to know me to know I've tried all of those things. Like, nothing is working. And she started to cry. And I was like, why are you crying? Like, why are you crying? And she's like, you don't understand how hard it is to be your friend. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And realizing that half of what's happening around us isn't about us. It's about how everyone else is. Like, it's how we take that on. So I could have taken on her emotions at that time, but I remember saying to her, I'm going to fix this for you. And there's no hard feelings. We're going to part ways, because I can't take that on right now. Like, I am drowning. I can't fix your problem. I can't fix how you're feeling with this. So that also means that when you're dealing with stories like this, a lot of times you end up reinventing yourself. You're reinventing the people you're around, the friends you're around, and doing that without resentment, anger, frustration. That took a long time to work through, because I was very angry at some friends who walked away, because I had people literally walk away. But it's not about me, right? It's not about me. It's about however they were handling it. And how do I know how I would handle it? Like, hell, I was living it and I couldn't handle it. So I can't. Judgment and letting go of judgment became a really, really big piece for me. I'm not perfect at it, but not judging people for where they're at and the decisions that they're making, because I don't know what they're living in. I don't know what life is like for them. So when people will say, like, can you believe they did that? I'm like, yeah, I guess. I have no idea we don't know what people are going through. And we're so good at putting on a fake face half the time that, like, we don't have a prayer. Even some of our closest friends, we don't know the struggles that they're going through. So judgment says a lot more about us than it does about someone else.
True. I'm sensing a lot of raw energy with you.
I'm raw. I am raw. It's that I am raw. I am very much raw. That's a space that I live in and that I feel very comfortable in. Sometimes I can go deep. I can definitely go deep. I feel like I'm supposed to. Like, I feel like that's where it's not an obligation. I just feel like that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And I remember my husband said to me once, if we make it through this, do you still want to talk about these things publicly? And I'm like, yes, I think this is what I'm supposed to do. And he's like, all right, just you go, do whatever, do whatever.
You talk about that 10-year period that you've sort of come through. I mean, what has to come with that to flip that energy? I mean, because I'm sure a lot of people, there's a lot of situations, a lot of things, and when it's all sort of almost been said and done, it's like the quiet after the storm, right? You're just going, what the hell do you do with this? How do you package it? Do you chuck it all in the bin? Do you write a book? What do you do?
Well, for me, I wrote a book. I wrote a book, and I didn't think I had a book in me, but I had a lot of journals, and friend or a mentor, I stopped trying to figure it out on my own. I stopped trying to, really, because I wanted out. I wanted to create change. I knew, I just, again, go back to the checklist. I feel like I had done everything. So I'm like, now what am I supposed to do with this? I feel like, am I supposed to do something with it? And I started asking different questions. And so I took those journals, I took the work, and I took it to, I'm going to say it was probably half a dozen publishers. I did self-publish, but a number of the publishers that I came across with really wanted to glorify the story. And I was like, no, that's not what I want to do with it. Like, I knew that wasn't it. I had this intention that the book would help people, even if they had never walked in my shoes. Like, I really, that was one of my number one intentions, that I wanted it, even if you never walked my story, could you pull something from it? And so it took me a while to find somebody to partner with. And and then the book started. And that was another scary beast on its own, because it was just, it's one thing to talk openly and to be online, to be on a stage, to do those things, but to like put it in print, it's out now. Like, it's out, like it's out there. So it was an exercise and a half, and I had to really do some deep thinking as, do I want to do this? Do I want to share this? And I kept feeling a pull that yes, like yes. And I would love to say that when I was in the space of deciding that I was going to write a book, that everybody was very supportive, and that was not the case at all. So you really have to go internal and ask yourself, like, what do you want to do with it? And for some people, you don't have to share a story publicly, but God, don't let the story hold you back. Like, regardless, even if you don't come to this space, don't let the story define you. That is like really one of the biggest things. I'm going to go deep again. I don't know who said the quote, but you can't love yourself and hate everything that made you who you are. So teaching people, like, do I love the worst things that happened to me? Of course not. But could I have learned the lessons any other way? No. Like, I'm a totally different person in a lot of ways, and I'm grateful for those lessons. So helping people to come through their story, to not let it define them, is, I think, what I'm here to do. And for me, it really started like 3 years ago. My book was published, and I decided with a book and a podcast, that was what I was going to do. They weren't business. They were just, I felt that was my gut pull. I had no idea what I was doing with the podcast, but I knew I wanted to create a space for women to share stories. That was like whatever else it was going to look like. And then I really just let go of control of what was going to happen. And so for me, taking those lessons and putting some of my hardest experiences in my life into work just gave it all meaning and gave it purpose.
That's beautiful. I mean, to share that and to put that out there, that's
It was
kind of,
hard. It's still hard sometimes. It's still hard sometimes. But it was, the name of the book is When She Stopped Asking Why. And the reason is because when I stopped asking why is when everything changed, right? Why is a victim? If you ask why, everybody thinks of why in Simon Sinek when you're shooting towards a goal, which is great. But when you ask why, as in terms of a story, or why am I here? Why did this happen? Why me? Those are all victim questions. And that was another turning point for me, was realizing that victim questions aren't changing anything. Like, they're not changing anything. So people say, why did this happen? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know. I actually don't know. And people would say, like, what did you, I love some of these questions. Like, what is the one thing that you think you did wrong? And I'm like, you know what? My mantra, I didn't buy it for them. I fought it all the time. I made it very clear it was not okay. I didn't give them money for it. I didn't, like, I didn't do anything wrong, because it wasn't mine to fix. And so really, those words and changing the words and the questions, they literally changed my life. They literally changed my life. And even now, when I have something come up, I'm like, okay, wait, what's my choice? And, like, don't ask why. You just have to trust that this is what you're here for, a reason. and that you're here to do something with it. So that's where the first book came out of, was really my story and sharing how the lessons that I learned to go from point A to point B, and maybe they will help someone else who's stuck in a story.
I mean, on that sort of seesaw of life, I mean, are you on sort of away from energy or toward energy? Where do you sit?
Um, I go towards energy and what feels good. Does that make sense? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it depends. What's your main push? It's a bit like going, saying to people, are you naturally a spender or a saver? Are you investor or a saver? We're all different creatures.
Yeah. I definitely go towards what feels good. I mean, I'm very clear. There are times where I'm like, no, I'm not going there. Like, that energy is not where I'm going. And even love both of my kids. We very different kids. And when it was at a point where, if they were having a hard time or they were being disrespectful, and then I would just be like, no, you have to go. We're done. Like, that energy's done. It's a straight line. I don't allow that to be spoken to that way. I don't allow that. But that can be family too. Like, that can be, so I have that clear. I used to say, like, this is my inner circle. I created it, and it's an invite only space. you don't you don't get a pass because you're family. It's an invite only space. So I don't have time to take on your energy. Like, if you're being very critical, you're being very judgmental, they just don't, there's no room for it. That's literally where I just shut it down. And I work to go towards what feels good, and the people, the connections, the work that feels good, the work that fills me up. Like, so it's going towards the energy and being clear of what I am not going to surround myself with.
Makes sense. What's your earliest conscious memory?
Oh, my earliest conscious memory. Um, that's a really good question. Um, I remember, like, living in, we lived in Chatham, which means nothing to you from where you are, but we lived a few hours away from where we are here. And I was very much like a kid that just played outside. Like, I was not into the toys or the cartoon. I just wanted to play outside. Very much a tomboy. And we grew up with a lot of boys. Like, it's funny because it was just myself and my sister, but my parents' friends all had boys. So it was always more rambunctious type play. It was always more freedom type play. And I don't know how many times I would come back from, playing in a gully, and my mom would be like, why can't you just here's the doll. And I remember her giving me a doll. I think it was Baby Alive, which again dates me. And I remember, and she came back in, and I had like cut the whole thing open because I wanted to know how it worked. Like, how do you feed it and it pees? I don't understand. And she's like, Lee, oh my God, why do you have to do this? But that was just me. I was very inquisitive, I'm sure I didn't go, I'm sure I wasn't easy in some sense. I challenged a lot of things. I was very much, I remember when I think I was 6 or 7, and my mom or my dad was asking, like, help your mom clean up the dishes. And I was like, well, why don't you help too? And he's like, well, I work today. I'm like, and so did she. So I don't understand. And I remember him, still tells the story. He was like, if you don't change your thinking, you will never find anyone to marry you. And I'm like, maybe I don't want to be married. It was just it was just always challenging what was considered norm, I guess, if that makes sense.
But that's also, is that a reflection on your parents that you could challenge, you could free
That
think?
is. It is, because, and I remember my mom saying this I'm a kid of the 70s, and my grandparents at that time, they're like, you need to tell her, like, kids are like seen and not heard, right? And saying she can't talk like that. Like, that's like, and I remember my mom's, I remember her saying, I'm sure it wasn't easy, but she's like, no, my words never mattered as a kid. She can speak. And I do remember that. So to me, I have always felt like I was a voice. Like, I felt like I was a voice. And I remember, I think I was in a public speaking competition. I think it was like grade 2 or grade 3. And I said, I want to do this. And they're like, are you sure? Because you have to stand on stage and you have to do it. I'm like, no, I do. I want to. And that was just something that I wanted to do. And it's not ego. It was just, I felt like that's what I was supposed to do. So a voice was something that was always encouraged for me, even though I'm sure there were times they were like, okay, tone it down. But it was just, I think it was encouraged. It wasn't discouraged.
Isn't it amazing that I mean, was that the true you? I mean, were you just were, and you were tomboy, you were kicking
Yeah.
around, you were pushing back, you were challenging when you wanted to?
Yep. Yeah, I would say that was me. I also I would challenge it, but I would also like I wanted to prove things. So, I was the first in my going to university. Like I was the first in my family to go. And I'm sure if you were to test me now, I'm sure I had some form of dyslexia or some form of, it was a challenge. School was very, very hard for me, but I worked hard. And that was where that became ingrained of like work hard and make it happen. And not that I don't think that that's true, but I think that there are times where it's like we don't always have to push everything. And sometimes that's been, I would say, you know, if somebody who crosses my, and this has happened, somebody who I haven't seen for like 1 or 2 decades, and they would say, you're so different now. And I'm like, I am, because I used to push only and like, I'm going to do it by myself. And now it's like, no, I'm okay to ask for help. Like, I'm okay to ask for help. I still use my voice, but I don't have to tackle it all on my own anymore. And I think that has been one of the biggest blessings, is learning how to ask for help. Not always perfect at it by any means, but stop trying to do life on my own.
Why did that independence come from? That it was, do you know?
Um, I don't know. I think back and I think that's as long as I can remember, that I remember being and when you're little and you're told that, I was always told I was bossy. I was always told I was like outspoken. And whereas now I like to call those leadership skills. Like I tell in kids that when parents say that, I'm like, are they really, or are they leadership skills? Like, let's not squash them in girls. Like we squash them in girls and we amplify them in boys. So sometimes that becomes as long as I can remember, that was something that I always felt was part of me. And people would come to me to ask for advice on things, and sometimes difficult things. And it seemed to be like, if I look at it, it feels like it's been a very natural progression. Like I don't think it's an accident that I'm where I'm at. Though I wish we could have done all this without any of the stuff that we had to deal with, 100%. But you know what? You can't speak, coach, write, teach, help others on something you haven't lived. You just can't. That's why I think it's so important to go into our stories, because it's the what we're here to do is based on what we've learned.
There's that thing, I suppose, unexpressed energy is the problem. Is it turns on you. You get your disease, you get all the, yeah.
Oh, isn't that true? Isn't that true? I've seen that with family members. I've seen it with friends. And I do believe that unexpressed energy or the shame or the things that we hold on to or the anger and resentment, I think they eventually start to become they affect us, our health, what we do, what it creates. Um, I could even go deeper for a second if so I just had back surgery. I had back surgery 8 weeks ago during COVID, which is not ideal time at all. Like if there's ever an ideal time, it's not an ideal time. And there's a part of me that believes that I carried so much for so long, and my body has gone through a lot of physical trauma, that I think that it's not an accident. And so, you know, again, how you look at it, I've had people say, like, I ended up with 2 rods, a bone graft, a titanium cube, and 6 screws. I didn't injure, like I didn't have an injury. This is something the doctor feels probably happened over time. Um, And my brain, how I process it, people would say, that's awful. It's like it's broken. I'm like, no, it's being rebuilt. Like it's being rebuilt. That's how right from the beginning, I was, now doesn't mean I wasn't upset when I first found out what was going to have to happen. But I do believe I carried a lot of trauma on my own for a very long time, and without really learning how to express it. And that's why the fighter in me she's been so helpful for so many things, because she got me to where I am. But I also think that there are times when our strengths become our weaknesses. And I had to learn that this can't be the only way to do it. I don't need to fight my way through life, because I'm literally killing myself doing it. And I was. So I think when you say that about what that does to our body and our insides, I think that's what happened to my back. I think that that was just a trauma, and trauma and trauma and trauma that I carried for a long time.
Do you remember your first event of shame?
I think that it was, I would say it was when it probably was earlier than 12. I mean, I remember, yeah, I'm sure it was probably earlier. Can I think of one in particular? No, a lot of my childhood is defined by being assaulted, and where that was at that time. And it was a really tough, I remember vividly at the time. God love him. I'm not saying there's nothing negative, but I remember my parents saying, like, this is the last time we'll talk about it. And I'm like, okay, what do I do with that? I don't know what to do with that. Again, when people talk about the Me Too movement, they're like, why would people not say something? Why would that? I'm like, you got to know what it was like then. Like, nobody talked about problems then. Like, that was not something that you talked about. Feelings we didn't talk about. We just didn't. And so I think that if I am fair, I call that like one of my early things of shame, because I remember, like, okay, so would I just say nothing? I don't know what, like, okay, we just put it down. And I think I just spent a lot of years pushing down those feelings.
I mean, interestingly, there, it's sort of, with the initial core feelings, and the saying that it sort of came from 12, but didn't come from 12, and I'm kind of getting the sense there was sort of multiple, shame happens before that typically, does it? Or is it?
Oh, I think it happens long before that. I think that, you know, uh, it depends on, as a parent, when your kids make mistakes or little mistakes or whatever it is, do you yell at them that it's like they're bad, or do you show them what the mistake was? Right? Like, I think that when I look at, my parents weren't like that you were bad. There was nothing like that. But it's how you perceive things, right? So if you perceive that they're mad at me and I did something wrong, then a lot of times the next step is that I'm bad, that I did something wrong and there's something wrong with me, so it's a really fine line. You can't control how everyone's going to take what you say, but as that, I think that shame feelings come from a really, really young age, like a really young age. And it is no one's fault of that. It's just, I think that that's something that happens at a young age. If you have a kid who wets the bed all the time, they're embarrassed sometimes about, and sometimes parents can get frustrated with that. So like shame feelings can come from a really, really early age, I think.
That makes
Hmm.
sense.
Hmm.
Tell me, what was Marsha going to do when she grew up? What was the plan?
No, the plan was that she was going to be a doctor. That was what my plan was, is I really wanted to be a doctor. I don't know why. It's funny because through university, one of my closest friends, still to this day, she actually is a doctor. And she always jokes that, like, I went back to school, I tried to upgrade, I applied, I even applied at like in my late 20s, again, early 30s, applied, and it didn't happen. And there just came a point where I was like, okay, I guess this isn't supposed to be. I mean, it was not. And she jokes to this day, she's like, you would have hated the profession. I'm like, why do you say that? She said, because you actually get to see things change. Like by the time people come to me, they're usually at the worst. It's like, I'm trying to make them comfortable. I'm trying to fix something. It's not, I don't get to see transformation and change. And that's all what you're about. You would have hated it. And I was like, oh, okay. So maybe that did happen for a reason. Like it, but I really wanted to be a doctor. And I think it's because I wanted to make a difference and help people through problems, which is what I do. I just do it in a different way now.
It's amazing what comes through. So you went through school. What happened? What was the journey?
I went through school for kinesiology, and so I helped people in, really it started with like post rehab, like rehabilitation, exercise. When they're done physio, what do they do next? And I did that, which kind of morphed into training clients and helping them. But my goal was never about like weight loss, or it just, that stuff never spoke to me. It was always about like, how can I help you to live your best life? So you get to do the things that you maybe haven't been able to do for a while. Grandparents get to play with the kids. You get to hike, you get to do these things. So it was always about helping them do something that they couldn't do before. So I did that for 27 years. And for the last decade, um, while we were going through this, my entire life was about hiding, because it was like, I go to work and they're like, how are you? And I'm like, I'm good. I kept deflecting, but I put everything into my clients and loved my clients. I had some clients I'd had for 20 years, loved them. But I knew I was supposed to do something else. I really felt like it. And so when COVID happened, my job was gone instantly and never came back. And so I remember the day, it was like March 17th, and I got an email from my college saying like, you're done until we notify you insurance wise. And I remember coming home and going, I don't know what to do right now. But then I remember waking up on March 18th and I said, okay, you asked for time and space to see if you could make this be your full-time business. And so let's do it. And that would just became this. And so I went really hard in the beginning, because at the time we were like, it'll be 2 weeks, it'll be 3 weeks. We had no idea, right? I just had this gut feeling though, that it was like, I think this is the time. I think this is what I have to do. But as I was doing that, I was really having to double down on self-care, my own self-care. And for the first time in my life, I was actually pouring into me first, as opposed to like seeing all clients first. And that was an interesting transition, because it was like, oh wait, I actually kind of like this. Like for my life, I was always getting the leftovers. I still did self-care and I still exercised, but it was like at the end of the day, when I was done work, I would get to me, because I was at work most times by 6. And I really liked that transition. I liked that, like I was able to do that. And then in my gut, I had a feeling something was going on with my back. I didn't know what it was. So this time of this year has been, job loss, change, dealing with a lot of pain, building a business, having back surgery, and building a business. So it's been such a transformation. But I also believe that I spent my 27 years in physical rehab and kinesiology to prep me for myself. Like I have literally been rehabbing myself is what I've been doing. And I think that's why I did it. I think that learning everything that I've learned helped me to recover as well as I have recovered.
Were you where you're supposed to be then?
No, not yet. Not yet. I think that I think I'm here to make a bigger impact, a bigger message. And physically, I am not where I'm always hard on myself though. Like that's just be real. I'm hard on myself. So I'm not where I want to be yet. But when I went to see my surgeon for a checkup like last week, and I'm sitting in the hospital and you're surrounded by, like, you want to talk energy. the hospital energy is really tough right now because it's just people are full of a lot of fear, frustration. My 5 days in the hospital was more mental than physical, way more mental work than physical. And as I watched and I'm sitting in the hospital, I'm looking around, I'm like, okay, Marsha, you're doing okay. Like like you might not be where you want to be, but you're doing more than you're doing fine. You're doing good. Like just calm down on all of it. So that's just the inherent part of me that wants to push and do more and wants to, she's learning how to slow down and she's learning how to, accept help. I definitely had to ask for help this last few weeks, this last 2 months, big time.
Interesting. You just disassociated there. She's learning.
Oh, I said that. Oh,
Mm.
well, she is learning. I am learning. Yeah, that's true.
Who is she? What age is she?
What age is she? Oh, interesting. Okay, let me see if I can go with my gut. That's a really good question. I don't know. I feel blank there for some reason. I feel like, okay. So I feel like there's a bit of two parts to me in that I feel like my future self is always guiding me. I feel like she is always, um, and not pulling me forward. She's guiding me. Like she's guiding me. And I say that sometimes I do. I actually have said that many times. And when I do or record a podcast, sometimes things will come out and I'm like, where'd that come from? Like, where did that come from? And I feel like she's guiding me to keep going. I feel like she's guiding me to keep going. And, my grandmother's spirit, I feel like she's always guiding me to keep going. So maybe I do disassociate more sometimes without even realizing it.
Maybe she is your
Maybe,
future self.
maybe she is my future self. So I there's a picture that I often refer back to, and it was a picture of me on stage for the first time sharing my story. And I look at that picture, and this might sound like silly, but I look at the picture and, she was 35 pounds overweight from what she is now. She was struggling. She was struggling big time. She was really struggling to show up. And I remember hating who I was at that time. I remember hating what I'm like, better. How did you let yourself go? How did you get, not the weight. I hated how I was showing up in the world. I didn't like where I was at. I felt like at that time that I had really failed a lot. I felt like I'd really failed, like as a parent, a mom. I was just like, who lets this happen? How do you stop this? Because I wasn't there yet. And I can look at her now and I look at that picture and I actually finally look at that picture and I thank her for fighting. Like I thank her for trying to, like she was going against the grain in every aspect of her life, trying to bring the message forward, to share the story. So a lot of times I see it as my future self is guiding me and loving who I was and what she's learned. So I don't feel like I'm alone. Does that make sense?
Does your language changes depending on who you're talking about too? Just quite curious.
Yeah. No, I don't even realize that I do. I don't even realize that I do that. But I just remember thinking that about that picture. And it's like, she fought hard. And I feel like I can't let her down because she fought so hard. Yet I know that there's more that I'm supposed to do. So I feel like my future self is guiding me. I think one of the lessons that I am forever working on learning is that I'm enough. Like, it's okay. You don't have to push and fight through life. It's like, you're enough. I think that is something that the self-talk, my body and brain have to accept sometimes. And sometimes I can do it and it's easy. And sometimes I can't, and I don't know why.
Yeah, because you talk about part of me wants this, part of me feels that, and it's in the past I've sort of, it seems you use a lot of kinesthetic language for stuff that's happened, and then you
Yes.
use visual language for the future.
Oh, yes. I would actually see myself as kinesthetic and visual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely would see those are big parts of me.
But it seemed, yeah, the visual and kinesthetic, but it depends. It seems, and I could be, I'm only from a very short conversation, but it seems the kinesthetic refers to the past and the visual to the future.
That's a really interesting observation. That's probably very fair. That is probably a very fair observation that I've never even noticed.
How do you collapse the gap between her, or she as you call her, and yourself and
Hmm.
the I?
I wow. I don't know. And I think that that's important to do because one of my struggles is always staying present. And I think that by collapsing that gap, that will help me to stay more present, which I've never thought about before. Um, because sometimes present is hard for me because my brain is like, but I want to be over here. I want to have this done. I want to hit this. I want to go. I don't know why, but it's always that driving forward. And so I think collapsing that is learning how to stay more present and good with where I'm at. Like this year has been such a huge period of growth for me, like huge, and I'm still growing. I still have a long ways to go. All of us do. I don't, but it's my identity was 27 years as a kinesiologist, and it was literally gone in a day. It was like just gone. And now there have been times where I'm like, okay, I'm not where I want to be yet. Or is this all part of the process? Which I'm sure it is. Um, I feel like this year has been very much an uphill climb of working from how do I build a business during a pandemic, deal with what's going on with my body. At that time, I didn't know what it was until middle August. And so those few months of waiting for tests because of COVID, I thought I was going crazy at times because I'm like, I don't understand why I can't walk. I don't understand why I can't, like something feels wrong. Um, I had a feeling in my gut it was really wrong, but I didn't know until August, and then everything really happened fast. So I think this year has been a real period of growth personally, and staying present is always a challenge for me to do. The hospital forced me to do that. That was like definitely, there was nowhere to go, no visitors to come in, nothing to happen. You just lay in bed. And I remember at one point thinking, okay, this is a challenge for you to learn how to be more present.
How is your inner language? How's your inner chatter?
Crazy sometimes. Totally being honest, like sometimes nonstop, like nonstop. I practice meditation, I do guided meditation, and I journal. And I think those things, I don't know where I'd be without those practices. Those practices help me to slow down and slow down the chatter. I've built a relationship with the chatter sometimes, and that I just like, I will, instead of resisting it, I just kind of laugh a little bit. And it's like, okay, Marsha, you've done this, you've been here. We don't need to do this. Like, we don't need to be, you're fine, you're safe, it's all good. And I think that has been recognizing that inner chatter and learning how to find some tools that help me with that chatter. Again, right? I think that the chatter is, in a sense, is has been some of my strength to keep going, to keep pushing through really difficult times. But it's not the only answer. Like it's not. It's learning how to quiet that chatter and trust that and stay present has been, I think, has been my probably my biggest growth this year, and my biggest thing that I recognize that I'm working on.
You say quiet the chatter. Why would you quieten it?
Because I think the quiet, I think that when I say quiet the chatter, I think it is about, again, staying present. You're doing enough. It's okay. Like it's okay. A coach said to me during this time that like the more I rest, the more I'm in alignment. The more I rest, the more I can build with ease. The more I rest, the more grace I practice. And all I can say is those words felt really good. Like they felt really, really good to me. And so they're like literally in my office, they're everything I write down. And every time I would feel myself go into push or the chatter of like, we're going to make this happen, or I was like, no, the more I rest, the more I've like, and that has been, it's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but I've really enjoyed learning that side of it. And there have been times where I'd be in the middle of the day and I'm like, I think I have to lay down. Like, I'm just, you're pushing, you've got to step off of this gas pedal. Then I wake up and I get a random message from somebody saying, I see what you do. I've been watching you for a long time. Can I work with you? And I'm like, what? So it's been some reinforcing where I have had moments of like, oh, so you mean if I do rest, I can actually stay in alignment and I can actually learn and build a business. So for me, I think it's been learning how to work through that.
Wow, it's amazing. I mean, have you a concept yet of what you're capable of, your potential, your power?
No, I don't think so. And I think that I think I underplay the journey that I have been on. I think, you know, I that sounds ego. It's not meant to be ego. I think I have to give myself some compassion and be proud of where I've come from and what I've done. And I think that that makes me emotional. I just think I actually have to do that. I do think I actually have to be proud of the battle. I feel like it's been a battle because I feel like my body and physically has been a battle. Be proud of how far I've come and really give it the space and rest and grace that it needs. Because yes, this has been a physical battle this year, but I think it's been accumulation of years of fighting. And like I said, I love that fighter. She did a really good job. I know I dissociated, but she really got me. And I love that trait. I do love that trait, but it's not the only trait. I think that she needs the person who is willing to give her grace and rest. And I also think that the work that I'm meant to do is not light. So rest, grace, ease have to become and are becoming more a part of my vocabulary because it's needed. It's necessary.
Why is it not light? Because you followed that with it's needed.
It's not light. The stories that people bring to me are not light. But they can be. They can be. And if I get wrapped up in someone's story, like I could go, like it's just like, okay, so it's always about like, let's flip this, let's perspective, let's look at it differently. If I stop, sometimes I will talk to someone and I'll be like, this is what I dealt with today. And they're like, oh my God, like, how do you deal with those kinds of stories? And I'm like, I don't know. I think that's what I'm supposed to. Like they can feel heavy if I focus on them that way. But if I can help somebody through some of those stories, I don't know. It just feels like purpose. It feels like it's what I'm supposed to do.
No, I get that, and I can see that gift in you. I mean, it's the introduction of it not being light, and it's kind of by very nature you kind of. But that's when a gift, and it's almost like an illusionist or whatever else it is. It's kind of going, bring it on, because I know this is just if I flip the charge on this,
yes,
this is just untapped energy you're bringing me. That's all it is.
Yeah.
There is no weight. In fact, it's actually got so much charge and potential. It's next level.
It fuels me, and it actually is. And I think I like the word charge that you said, because it is fuel. It doesn't take from me. You go back to the question you asked me about energy. It doesn't take from me. It actually does fuel me when it's like, oh my gosh, and this person wants to find a way to work through it. And then when all of a sudden you start to see, these women are building a business, or they've published their blogs, or they're writing a book, and it's just like, and then they'll send me screenshots of the stories and messages they're getting. And I'm like, yeah, practice receiving. You're about to get them. You're about to like this. It's just, I do love that. And that does fuel me in such a way that I love. And I think, it's funny because I'm attracted to some of those stories, like I am. And because I can see, it's like I feel like the superpower sometimes. What my client said to me, she's like, it's like you wear Superman glasses. You can see through the problem to see that this person can do something with it. And when I run my programs, I don't typically make this public because I don't advertise, but when I run my programs, I always offer a scholarship to one person that I reach out to. And so I don't open it up like it's applications. And I open it up to a person. And the last 3 times I've run it, the person who I brought in on a scholarship has like exceeded. It's been really cool to watch. They're like, what do you like? You're going to do this, and you're going to, and you just see some hope and things build in them. And I remember being there. Like people lifted and poured into me, and that fuels me in a way that I just don't even know how to describe. So I like the word charge. It is something that does charge me up.
Talk to me about forgiveness.
That's a big word. That's a really, really big word. I think forgiveness is something that I've really spent a lifetime working through, and most of it being like towards myself. That the mom piece, geez, that's a hard job, no matter what you call it, even if you don't have any issues, which I don't believe anyone does. But I had to really, really practice forgiving myself for feeling like I created the problem, that I caused it, that I didn't do enough. And I would have to go into a space, whether it's mantra or writing, that it's like, okay, you didn't buy it for them. You fought it all the way. You tried to get all the help. You did everything that you could. I had to learn that loving them, sometimes from a distance, was what my job was to do, and forgive myself for feeling like I didn't do enough. I know I did, because there was just no stone unturned. There was nothing unturned. And so I think forgiveness is something that I am always working through, so that when I feel like I'm not doing enough, then sometimes it's that, no, Marsha, like you're doing this, like you are, like you're doing enough. It's okay. I think forgiveness is, I'll go into a word of that I use a lot, can be tied to what expectations did we have? Like how do we always set ourselves up for expectations, and expectations are always future based. So, which is not something we can control. So creating those expectations and then not measuring up to them and then trying to learn to forgive ourselves for something that we couldn't attain in the first place, is a really vicious cycle. So I would say forgiveness is something that I am always working on with myself, and being fair. That, I'll go back to, I used to say, did she do everything that she could at the time? Like, she fought so hard. And it just allowed me to look at it and go, I remember fighting so hard. I did everything that I could. So I have to forgive myself. And maybe my role, like maybe I played the role that was my role to play. Like maybe that's what my role was. I still love them. They knew that. I would always say it, but that's all that I could do at the time. And so forgiving myself that was enough. Like that was enough. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's yeah, it's always an interesting topic for people, and it's can be a toughie.
It really can be a toughie. I don't know how many people would say to me at the time, they're like, but aren't you afraid that like, your kids are going to die if you don't do something. I'm like, I don't know what else to do. Like, I don't even know what else to do. There was nothing else to do. And I remember the point in time where I was like, but I did lose them in a sense, because they never came back to me as the same kids. Doesn't mean it was worse. They came back different because they grew up in ways that we allowed them to. When it was my one son ended up losing his entire year. And he was like, I thought they couldn't fail kids. And I'm like, well, I guess, like, you don't go, that's what happens. And I had to go into a space of almost, what's the word? It's like non-reactive. The best lesson, I wish I would have learned this as a parent sooner, is say less. Like, say less and don't react. And not react to those things, and letting them learn and come up to those solutions. So he didn't go to school for a year and a half at all. And I remember him coming back and he said, Mom, I think I want to go to school. And I'm like, it's probably a good idea. And he was like, I don't want to wash dishes forever. And I'm like, yeah, I get that. Like, I get that. And he was like, do you think that could you come with me to go into the school to help set it up? And I'm like, no, I think you can do it. Like, I think you can do it. And that also means that, like, when I remember when he graduated school, I remember saying to him that, just remember something, you did that. Like, I didn't do that for you. Like, you did that. You decided to go back to school. You decided to finish. And I remember somebody saying, like, you did a great job with that. I'm like, no, he did that. Like, he did that. We can't own, two people can't own a problem at the same time. Two people can't own a victory at the same time. We all have a part in it. But I remember being I am proud that that's how I saw it. And because I think it's really important that he owns that win. That's his win.
It is. I mean, I'm getting a lot of emotion from you when you're talking about that, and the proud, and being proud of that.
Well,
it's a credit to you.
I'm really proud. And I remember somebody saying to me when he graduated from high school that he went, so we didn't get like all the normal milestones that people would have as parents, right? We don't have any of them. We didn't have, like, I got milestones, but the things that you go through when your kids are in that grade, like driving, prom, like graduation, like we didn't have any of that. We didn't have any of it. So when he finally graduated, I'm like, do you want to go to graduation? He's like, no, Mom, like, I don't, like, no one's there that I know. I don't want to do that. And I had a friend say to me, so what? He graduated high school. Like, what are you going to do with that? And it wasn't a defensive mode. Like, for the most of my life, I was very much the fighter, right? Like, just to prove, I was like, well, he's alive and he went back to school and graduated today. I'm good. Like, I'm good. I'm happy. I'm good. And that's the part that I talk about when I say, like, I'm proud of being in that space. And that's the lessons that I think I was meant to learn, not push more to fix it, more to let go and let it land. And it could land in not good times. It could land in challenging, but we can also go out and be hit by a car. Like, I can't control those things. I really found gratitude in that. I'm just proud of where they're at and what they're doing and the lessons that they're learning. And they've lived many, many lifetimes in their young age, many, many lifetimes of what they've learned and lived through. But I think they were supposed to, because the lessons weren't coming from me or my husband anymore. They just weren't. They were coming from the world. Like, the world had to tell them that this is not okay. And legally, it had to tell them this is not okay, or what you're doing is not okay. And the more those messages come from not just us, the more it gives them the opportunity to realize, like, okay, this is mine to create. This is mine. And I remember him saying to me, we joke about it. Like, we have very open conversation. We probably have conversations most parents would cringe about. But I remember him saying, Mom, all those people who were critical of you when you threw us out at a young age. I'm like, yeah. He's like, yeah, a lot of them still have their kids at home in their basement, like not going to school, not working, not doing things. And it's not right or wrong. It's just that we really just we made the decisions that we did at the time. No parent. I look back at that. I had to forgive her because throwing your kids out at 16 and 17 in to live on a street is not what I pictured my life being and their life being. But we weren't going to survive if we were all here. We weren't. There was no way. We were not going to. It was not possible.
And it's coincidental. I was one of my mastermind groups this morning, and someone actually was talking not that dissimilar, but is going, well, listen, I have to be thankful that he's not dead and I'm not in jail.
It's honestly, many, many times. Yeah, I simple. I think that is one of my biggest blessings of learning is like that helps me to stay present. Is I'm grateful for where it's at. Um, we have learned so much about different expectations and maybe our, you know, I don't know what Christmas can people can what's it going to look like, which I'm like, I don't know. So this year, as COVID really blew up everything, um, and I turned 50 this year, and I can't tell you how many people were like, this is terrible. I'm like, what's terrible? Like, what's terrible? And they're like, your 50th is during COVID. And I'm like, yeah, I can think of things that are far worse terrible. Like it's not where my brain goes. And I've learned to be it was actually my best birthday in a way because my husband arranged a drive-by. Like, and it was just the most beautiful thing because it was so simple and I'm all about the experience. So learning those things and being grateful for where things are at. Yeah, we almost lost them multiple times. So yeah, I was so grateful for where they are and what they're learning and what they're doing. And such simple things, so simple. It sounds funny for somebody else, but I'm watching my one son who has a girlfriend now, and he's finishing college, and she's wonderful. We always pray for his moms and boys, right? That the right girl comes along. Just, but I'm watching as he's cooking supper in the kitchen, and she says, like he's a good cook, and I'm like, yeah, he's a really good cook. I remember like teaching him how to cook when he was 10 and 11, and because I wanted him to be independent. Then of course he lived on his own for 6 years because that's where life took him. And I watch it and I'm like, yeah, it's really cool actually to watch, right? It sounds like the simplest thing, but I love watching those simple things and seeing that, it's life made him who he is today. He certainly is more mature than most 23-year-olds because he's lived a lot of lifetimes in that time.
I mean, that in itself is so striking. And, it almost feels like, that one drop is enough to make up, you know,
Yes.
the graduation, his pride, your pride for him, that makes up for a lifetime of stuff.
It makes up for a lifetime of stuff. And it's all, this goes back to expectations. I think we have to be really careful what weight we put on things. So, is the graduation, the prom, the driving, is that what it all means? Or I always said, I mean, in my own words, I always said when they were younger, I'm like, my job is to raise them to be adults that can function in society. Like, that's my job. My job is not to hold on to them. I said it even before I had kids. My job is not to hold on to them. My job is that they are independent. And so this is exactly where we're at right now. I watch it and it's just, yeah, I am grateful for where it has taken us. Where are times my husband and I will say, he'll like, do you remember something? I'm like, oh my God, I do remember that stage, or I do remember what happened with that. Um, but as a friend said to me, where would they be if you hadn't let them fall? Like, where would they be? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't even like to think of that. I mean, that also means, and again, I'll just be real with you, with the laws in Canada, that if something goes wrong as a parent and they're under 18, you have to press charges physically. So what a horrible space to put parents into, in the fact that you're trying to save your kid and you want me to charge him with something. And we've done that twice with both of them. And we've had more court explain. And knowing what I know now, I would have fought to do it sooner. I would have fought because it's not about fault. It's when do we learn lessons is when there's consequences. If there's never any consequences, we don't ever learn them. Like who does? Nobody does. So it's not, when I look back, it was a bit of a perfect storm, because in every aspect of their life, the only person who had a problem with what they were doing was mom and dad. That was it. That was it. Police didn't, school didn't, nobody did. And it's that doesn't help anyone. So I'm grateful that we stuck to what we felt was right. Again, I mean, I wish it had been easier, but you can't read about that in a book and learn it. Like you can't, that's the one thing I talk about with my clients. I'm like, no, you can't run away from what you learned, because that's what you're here to teach on. You can't read that stuff in a book. You can't. There's no book that you're going to take that in and read it. You have to live it. And so I like to believe that we didn't live that for an accident. If I can give it purpose and do something with it, it just makes it all feel like it was for a reason and serving a much bigger purpose.
So that isn't it, that expression, was it to know the light, you've got to see the dark, or vice versa? It's
And you have to have one. You can't have both, right? You have to have, you can't have one without the other. You have to have both in order to see it. And yeah, that's when you say that, I am really, really proud and grateful for things that might seem really small and redundant to a lot of people, but I'm so grateful for them. Like I'm just so grateful for them. And um I'm glad that I can be grateful for those simple things.
Talk to me about your intuition.
Oh, she's I'm gonna go separate here for a second. I trust her. She's very strong. That's why I believe she's my future self. So there's a part of my intuition that I feel like she's always been guiding me. She's like, no, this way, this way. When I talk about, I'll go into my own health for a second. I had a pregnancy when I had an ovarian cyst when I was 14. And back then they removed it and it was very painful. Always had issues with my cycles, blah, blah, blah. And it just was always an issue. And I had 3 miscarriages. So 5 pregnancies, 3 miscarriages. The one miscarriage was when I was 32. And I remember finding out I was pregnant, but it was the weirdest feeling. I didn't see the baby coming. Like I was like, there was something I had 2 pregnancies at that time, 2 kids at that time. This felt off. Something felt different. They did the first ultrasound. Everything was fine. I'm like, okay, it just must be you. It's just, and this was literally after 9/11. So things were it was just energy in the world was really at a different space. But it didn't feel like the pregnancy was happening. I didn't understand what was happening. And we were about 6 months and I passed out at work. Didn't know why. I thought my blood pressure was off, and went and they did some blood tests and found out that my HCG levels were at like triple. I should have been having triplets for how high they were. And that's when we found out we'd lost the baby. And they did the DNC, and I don't know, maybe a couple of days later, my family doctor called me and she's like, I need you to come in today because we have to talk. And my husband and I went in. There's a reason this all ties in, and my husband and I went in, and she said, your OB is going to say it's cancer. I need you to hear it from me before you go. And literally that's what happened. And they said it was what they call partial molar pregnancy, and it started as a baby, but a mass grew on it and it morphed into a growth. So I was showing, I was growing, I was all of those things. And then from there ended up having to do 2 years of blood tests every month where they would test me. And he said, if you even try and get pregnant, we will abort the fetus before we even find out if it is a fetus, because we can't risk this. So for 2 years, I lived on this, like following my health, what's wrong, and something, so 2 years of that. And then in the next 6 years, I had another 6 surgeries where there was endometrial growth that was rampant. Whatever this molar pregnancy started, it started something in my health that was very, very different. Like I had periods, I couldn't get off the floor. I was having pain that I couldn't even describe. And over all those surgeries, I remember it very well. It was December of 2007. And we had just celebrated Christmas and I was cleaning up. And I swear I heard this voice, that if you don't do something, this is your last Christmas. And it was so clear that I was like, maybe I should ask for a hysterectomy. Like maybe something is wrong. So I fought with my doctor, my OB, many times because I was only 37 at the time. And I said, I need to do a hysterectomy. He's like, we're not doing a hysterectomy. You're way too young. And I'm like, well, I'm not doing a surgery every year. Like this is just the recovery time, the health of, I knew that was real. Like I knew it was real. Like I knew it. And for months, he and I fought back and forth until I was like, no, it's my body. And I need to have this done. Something is wrong. Even to the point when I was going under and he said, we're not taking your ovaries. And I said, you're going to have to take my ovaries or the problem. And he's like, do you want to bet on it? I'm like, yep, let's bet. And when I woke up and he looked at me and he said, how did you know? And I said, I knew it. And he's like, I'm not sure you would have seen 40. So your ovaries were the problem. And so they removed everything. But anybody who's ever fought with endometriosis, it grows like your endometrial tissue in your uterus grows in other parts of your body, which means that when you cycle, everything contracts and bleeds. So it's extremely painful. And post hysterectomy, I had 2 more surgeries where I was still bleeding. So picture you've got no female organs. And I'm like, awesome, now I'm bleeding again. Like, how is that possible? But it's very rare, but it happens. And both times I went back in for second surgery and I said to the OB, this is where I can feel it. This is where I know where it is. And both times, that's what it was. So in a weird about way, I'll never have proof of this, but when they did the hysterectomy, the endometrial tissue, he said, it's in your bowels and in your spine. And he said, there's no way we've got it all. Like we can't, all it needs is a few cells left and it'll start to reproduce again because your body is supposed to produce estrogen. And that's what it does. And so I actually even believe that part of what happened with my spine and my back, it was like literally pulling apart. And when they showed me pictures of my spine, it was like the vertebrae were 1.5 centimeters apart. It had been physically pulled apart without an injury. So long story, back to intuition. There came a point in time where I know that pregnancy, that girl that I carried, she helped me to be still here today. So I'm grateful that she helped me to have my hysterectomy, to fight through those things so that I could be here during this time. Now, I didn't always think that. During the chaotic years, I was like, I don't want to be here. Why am I here? I believe in hindsight. And so I've even written a letter to her. I wrote on her, what would have been her 18th birthday. I wrote a letter and I put it out on Facebook. And I cannot tell you the number of women who sent me, they're like, I never thought of celebrating what would have been their birthday. And I'm like, we always celebrate like when they died, what happened. What if we celebrate their birthday? I believe she taught me many things to be strong, follow my intuition, fight so that I could be here today. And I don't take that lightly. Like, I really don't take that lightly. I'm grateful for that chance. So when it comes to my intuition, I really do trust it. It's just sometimes you have to quiet the chatter to be able to hear it.
Is she like a guide for you then?
I think so. Yes, 100%. She is my intuition, or she is the girl, the baby. One and the same. I think it's one and the same. I think I just feel like she is, I guess, the space of saying I wasn't meant to meet her yet. I wasn't meant to meet her yet, but she has played such a big role in my life, in how I show up.
Yeah.
I'm glad you went there, because it's just been such again, as people have said, like, that's terrible about your back. And I'm like, no, I think that it needed to be rebuilt. And I think that it needed to. And, I don't know, a month or so ago, my husband brought home an article of a woman who had been fighting endometriosis for years. And as I read it, I said to him, I wonder if that's what's happening to my back. Like, I wonder if this is all part of what I've gone through for the last 20 years. Like, I wonder if this is all part of it. No one can ever tell me that, but yes, I believe that it is.
What's your view on the future?
What's our view in the future? I think that, you mean just generally? Yeah, I think this time now is showing us, like, what potential we have, what we can all do, how we can be better, how we can, it's really important for me to always be able to look at something from someone else's point of view, is being able to, and that's empathy, but just being able to look at it from someone else's point of view. So as people say, this is the worst time in our lives, I'm like, well, I still have a house. I still have a place. I mean, there are people who don't, there are people losing their businesses. So I really hope that collectively that we can come to a space of more kindness, more support for others, more empathy. And where can we help others instead of judge where they're at? Like, where can we help other people? Because, at any time, like, shoes turn, right? I've been on both ends I've been at some of the lowest points in my life, and I've been at some of the points where I'm like, I feel like I can take on the world. So our world can change at all times. It can flip. So I think that is, I just think, I hope that we can come to a space of, like, more empathy, more kindness, more reflection, and understand that a lot of people are going through a lot of stuff right now. And where can we put more kindness out? Where can we be? I mean, wear it on my wrist because it's my reminder, is like, where can we be the change? Like, when I'm frustrated with things, I'm like, no, are you being the change that you want to see? Like, where can we be more of that, as opposed to angry of where things are at? Where can we do more or be more in the world?
Being you.
Yes.
What do you love to do?
Well, I love a little bit of everything. I love to work out. I took up CrossFit like 3 years ago. My husband is a CrossFit coach and does all kinds of stuff. I love that. Like, I love that kind of working out, but that's all been gone right now, and I haven't been able to do that. So I do love to feel good, feel strong. But then I also love, like, being out in nature and taking my dog for a long walk with nothing. I love listening to audiobooks. I love reading books. I love working with clients. I like quiet time. I like a little bit of everything. I like it when my life is a mix of all of it. But I do, like, I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes I will give and I podcast and I connect and I love it. And then you'll find me curled up on my blanket reading a book, or just curled up. So I like a lot of different things, as long as I allow myself and give myself time to recharge. I know when I haven't, because then it's like, okay, no, I can't do this, back to rest again, back to grace, back to those things. As long as I build that in, it feels really good.
Where's your, your place of greatest grounding, or where would you retreat to? Place you feel most connected?
Hmm. I have a really, really big tree in my backyard that in the summertime, you can pretty much find me working under it most of the time. Like I work outside under this tree because I can sit outside and be in the sunshine and enjoying that. For me, it's sun. I mean, definitely love being in sun and fresh air. And even now, I look out, it's like we've just come off of a couple days snowstorm. And yeah, but it's sunny and I love the sun. So I think for me, being like outside in the sun, soaking that in changes a lot of my energy. I love it.
What's your guilty pleasure then?
Guilty pleasure. Watching TV, curling up with that. Cooking. I mean, I say there's I love cooking. But guilty pleasure is like, even I'm gluten-free. So having my gluten-free pizza, having, whether it's cider or I'm just like curled up and, enjoying that chocolate for sure. Like I can't even imagine not a life without chocolate. That doesn't happen.
What's your go-to in the chocolate? That's quite a common one. I'm always interested.
Dark. Dark sometimes mixed with coconut or dark with almonds. Yeah, I'm not super sweet, and I'm just, as long as I can have a piece, I like it. It's my go-to.
And what's your specialty in the kitchen?
My specialty in the kitchen, well, it depends on who you ask, because I've always been a thing about trying to make recipes healthy. So my kids would even say, okay, you made the muffins. Did you make them like your healthy way? Or did you do like, what did
The
you
dirty
do?
way.
Like, did you just like make them, or did you like tweet mom made them? Oh, what did she put in them? Because that's always been my thing, is trying to make it healthier. And I've made some pretty good ones where I've figured it out, and other ones I'm like, no, just let it go. I am such a geek for bulk cooking. I am like, people, my friends will laugh. They'll come to my house and they're like, you've got like, your fridge is full of, there's like veggies are cut up. On Sundays, my husband and I will cook for like 3 days. 3 to 4 days. And it's just, we both cook. We love it. And it's just makes my life easier. I don't have to think about it. So, I have salads ready. I have vegetables ready. I love vegetables. It's something that I feel good when I'm eating that. So those are just I think, very simple cooking, to be honest, and very, very simple, and basic, but it works really well for us.
I'm just slightly curious that the bulk cooking almost reflects your bulk working. It's like flat out, lots of work, really quiet time off, lots of work. Do you get me? I'm kind of seeing a bit of a
No,
connection.
there's a connection there. No one's ever said that, but it's very true. There are times where it's like a mental thing for me, that on Sunday I like to have like X, Y, and Z done. And there are times we'll be away and I'm like, okay, so how am I mean, do we survive? Of course we survive. It's not the end of the world. It's just, I find it a way to, make sure I can get some good healthy food as I go through the week. But yes, that's definitely a pattern. You're right.
You're a butcher.
I'm a butcher.
Be very careful how you actually pronounce that. But yeah.
Yeah, the way you said it sounded really bad. I was like, that's awesome.
Oh, I love it. Listen, one or two words. What's your fire in the belly?
My fire in the belly, truth. Truth. Like, own who you are. Like, own who you are. Own your story. Like, take ownership for it. Radical responsibility. It's freeing. It's not blaming. It's when the pivotal point was, I think it was Stephen Covey's quote, like, you are not a product of your circumstances, you're a product of your decisions. And that always just stuck with me early on. So anything, ownership, choices, responsibility they're just go-to words. They remind me that I have a choice in how I respond and what I do.
That's one of the first things you said. You talked about powerful choices.
Well, and I laugh, like, my podcast has been going for 3 years and it's own your choices, own your life. Like, I literally wrote that 3 years ago and it's been kind of the umbrella to everything that I do. It's freeing, like, choice is freeing. It's freeing for all of us. It really is. It's very freeing.
Talk to us about your book and your podcast.
Okay, my book. So my first book is called When She Stopped Asking Why. It's on Amazon, and it is really sharing my story of what do you do when life doesn't follow the plan, which is always. And I share that. My second book is called Owning Your Choices, and that is on Amazon as well. And that's the collaborative story of 8 different women from around the world sharing their stories of what they overcame and what they're doing with their stories to make an impact. And my podcast is called Own Your Choices, Own Your Life. And it is we are done episode 190 right now. And I mean, I have like almost 20 interviews in the bank. It's crazy. It's crazy right now. But I love it. It's allowing people to share their stories of really recognizing that our stories make us who we are. And once we take ownership of those choices and those stories, we can actually do something with it. And a lot of them are doing something, and they can start to look at their stories and go, their story is actually what started them on this path and what they're doing. So that's the podcast. I love it. I do little short snippets. I also do interviews, and it's just going to continue to grow in different ways.
I love it. Just confirm your website.
MarshaVanW.com, because there was no need to put the whole name in there because it's so big. If you go to Google and you start typing Marsha Vanwynsberghe, I'm pretty much the first 15 searches. So it was like, we don't need to put the whole name in there.
Congratulations for people. You own Google. I love it. Yeah, that's what I've taken away from that.
I like that. I'll take that.
Closing message.
Closing message. Your story matters. Your story matters. The lessons that you've learned, someone is praying for the solutions you're holding out to, like someone, and that was you many years ago. So you learning how to stand on your story, you will find yourself freedom, and you will be able to help someone else on their journey. And when you can pay those lessons forward, it'll pay you back in ways you could have never even imagined.
Marsha, it's been beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
It's been beautiful. Thank you so much.